Hi, this is Justin again. I'm looking forward to talking with you today, and I wanted to do something a little different today. I think this is our 14th session, and I've tried to make those sessions kind of self-contained. You can turn to any of them, and they'll have a little preamble to try to tell you what the preceding sessions were about in the most general way, but I've tried to make them kind of self-containing. But I think that there may be many of you who are a bit confused because I've taken positions on the unconscious, the psychic world, art, God, the pre-literate mind, and all that. I haven't given you any real background on myself as a person and as an artist as to what my beliefs are, and I just thought it'd be good to lay those out because they flavor everything I do, and most of the beliefs that I have been long-standing with me. I don't change my ideas that often. They simply tend to develop a little, let's say they will tend to get a little more expanded, if you will. That's really the trick, is to, excuse me while I just do some nonsense here. They tend to just expand more, but in fact, in terms of their essence, they've always remained the same since I was a young man. That's not to say that I don't have an open mind. I do, but it seems that when I first developed, I had some innate beliefs that were often contrary to what was accepted, but I refused to change them. And only when I came into contact with thinkers like Jung and Graves and Castaneda, to name three who have been highly influential in my life, that those thoughts and those senses of the world began to flower a bit. I've never been one to follow anybody. I'm just ornery. I wanted to figure it out myself, and I've often been stumped. There are little pieces that are missing, and there are little pieces that are missing still, and I don't think that you can ever figure out who you are and what you believe in the fullest. All you know is what you think you know, and I can pass it on to you. Let me say that as an artist, let's just talk with me as an artist first, because that's the thing that drives all my thinking, and in particular as a poet, that I've always had a poet sensibility, but I developed rather late in terms of actually creating poetry. It started in high school, very little bit, and then by the time I got to college, I went as a science guy, back in the Sputnik days, and I happened to stumble into a 17th century English poetry class, and that really changed all my thinking. I just realized I was home. This is where I belonged, because I understood everything immediately. There's a sense that I have of poetry that nobody can ever tell me that this is a good poem if I don't think it's a good poem. I just have an innate sense that the poem has succeeded, and it didn't matter whether it was written in the 17th or the 18th or 19th or 20th century. And I also soon realized that there were two opposing schools of thought. There was one, you can go back to the Archibald MacLeish, a poem should mean, not be. A poem should be, not mean. Mean, not be was essentially the kind of outstanding thinking when I was going to college at Columbia. You always had to get meaning from everything, and that still goes on in the academic world. It's the worst. A poem is your mirror held up to life. And that mirror reflects down to the deepest levels, meaning that the image it holds up, and I mean, let's talk about your poetry primarily, and you can talk about the plays of Shakespeare being poetry as well, is that the little world that it holds up pulls up in us a remembrance of who we are. There's a tragic sense or a comic sense. It's a big picture. It's not a picture of details. It's a picture of humanity, basically, that the little soldiers in the play pull up, you know. And I could never stand poems that mean you had to examine them or that didn't close properly, meaning that you don't get that little thrill, that little moment of ecstasy. I just considered them to be failed poems. And thank God I had enough good professors at Columbia at the time who were either poets or had the right head about poetry, that they didn't get too confused about trying to get meaning out of poems, that the poem was meant, the poem is like a kiss. You should just take it as a kiss and an embrace, and it might be a dark kiss and it might be a very light kiss, but it's a kiss. And this is you shouldn't really go any further than that. You know, you don't think about the kisses you get from your loved ones. You just accept them, and that's what you should do with poetry. And then what you have inside you then is that little feeling, or large feeling, depending on the poem that's pressing into you, that you've read or heard or whatever it happens to be, that makes you glow. In fact, reminds you of your total humanity. The same thing happens when you actually make a poem, and I've been trying to press that home to people, that poetry is not an academic exercise. It's not a literary exercise, although it's become that today. It's a shame. It's an everyday human activity, and it's something that brings the two halves of us together. It brings the conscious and the unconscious. So from the very start, I've always rejected poetry. I don't care who says it's great. That if it doesn't give me that lift, that in fact I consider it to be, in poems of the sun that your grave says so graciously, but I just consider it to be your poetic thoughts or your prose, you're masquerading as your poetry, and you can tell because it never closes correctly. It never lifts you into that state of ecstasy. It might be clever, it might be intense, it might be cerebral, but it's not a poem. It's not the brass ring. We want to go around and grab the brass ring. That's what it's all about. That feeling extends into everything that I do. If when I read a novel, if it doesn't give me that same lift, I soon stop. You know, I have a very small group of novelists that I'm drawn to read. Excuse me, still this season in Florida with this pollen all over the place. Let me give you an example of who I mean by that. I would mean Dickens, who's a very organic novelist, you know. That I would take the same with Cervantes, Gabriel Marquez, when he's really cooking. And in fact, despite the fact that he's filled with ideas which drive me crazy, I do like Saul Bellow. And Philip Roth is a great novelist and who can come close to poetry at times. The same with Nabokov. Certain novels of his, and certain sections of novels, I should say. Castaneda, although it looks like he's writing journals, are really short. They're poems, because what they do is they kind of bring you to the other world. They bring you into your true nature, and they do it flawlessly. I think that that would give you some idea of who I would read as novelist. You know, there's a critic by the name of David Steiner who was probably very bright, and I happened to pick up one of his books once, and I never read so many polysyllabic words, and I have a pretty good vocabulary, you know, so I'm going through it. And this guy is a thinking critic, and he was out to prove that at the bottom of every art is a search for meaning. But thank goodness that he was honest enough to simply stop at Shakespeare and says, except for Shakespeare, who had no ideas. Zero. None. Nada. Zilch. The end. Nothing. That's that in fact the true mirror has no ideas. No axe to grind. It's simply held up, and the muse pours through, and out of it comes a picture, which is a picture of a surface, a drama, Hamlet, for example, but inside it is that kernel of feeling that brings us to a moment of ecstasy. Is the only thing you can say. Even his dark plays do. There's beauty in darkness. Truth is beauty, beauty is truth, and it's true about every aspect of human life when it's cast correctly, because the idea of the play or the poem or a piece of a novel, if it succeeds, is to bring you to that recognition. So being, the poem should be, not mean, or a poem should not mean to mean but be. I guess that's the correct thing from MacLeish, whose own poems were very meaning, except for that one, which was a nice one. But he had your right idea. To me, it's the right idea. So that I'm not at all convinced by art that you have to study. I didn't like it in college. I always got arguments with professors about it. I didn't want to consider it art. It may be clever, it may be insightful, it may be astounding, it may be all kinds of things, but it never comforts us on the level of really great art. Great art comforts us. Like Yeats says, Hamlet and Lear are gay. Which meaning no matter how much the dread that's coming down around them, out of that is rising this wonderful, ecstatic sense of what it means to be human, fully human, and of our place in this mystery. So I would say that the first thing about me as an artist is I'm on the outside. There are more poems with meaning being written today and that are failing because it's become now a academic path. Sad, but that's what happens when you take things out of their proper realm. And there are some poets who are in the academic world, not very few. Most would like to live outside it in some way to try and support themselves. It's hard. Nobody's going to buy the books, for example. But it's important that you always be on the edge of is and not looking back, and that's what the academic world wants to look back and classify and categorize and say what's art and what's not. Artists don't worry about what. They have a general sense they've made up since they were infants, and then they just pursue it, And everything that they do is a different version of that little kernel of themselves, that way of reflecting the world. It might get richer in some poems and may not be so successful in others. It may be in a whole new form. I consider all of my work, for example, whether I work in video, whether I speak the poems out or write the poems out, or even in the recent novel I just wrote, is very close to a series of prose poems, and is very close to a epic in the sense that it consists of chapters that kind of close like poems, like little prose poems, and it has all of the earmarks of a epic as it is a journey of the soul, and it was written organically, like in many of Dickens' early novels. He just let it roll. He was one of the world's great storytellers, and it just kind of wound its way out of him in a serpentine way. He didn't worry about having great Jamesian structure. That's for all the guys in the English department to worry about, He was a true genius. So I think as an artist I can say is that I always believe that art is intuitive. It hits us on an intuitive level. It's not meant for the brain. It's meant for the soul. You can call it the heart, but it goes deeper than that. It goes to the essence of our humanity, and it's a mirror that's held up that suffuses us with the feeling of what it means to be human on all kinds of levels, from the comic to the tragic, and they're all beautiful and they're all true. So I have no truck with all this meaning and stuff. I think it's a waste of time. It's something that you do to get promoted. And I don't have to get promoted. I'm one of those people who have always lived outside that world. And in fact, I don't really care for it. It's just too conformist, really. It's horrible. That feeling extends to, so that I'm always on the outside as an artist. I will do things. Well, you can't do that. You can't make a video poem, and you make poems in the old way. That's not the deal. You can't make them by speaking out like Homer did. Well, it's good enough for Homer. It's good enough for me, and for the thousands of Homers who surrounded Homer. Don't forget that Shakespeare wasn't alone in his ocean. There were lots of fish there, and some were almost as big as he was, and some were little, like Herrick. So those were all around Homer too. There's a great oral tradition that existed in Ireland where my parents came from, right up until the turn of the 20th century, because most of the people were illiterate. They've been held down by the English. It's not well known, but they lived in a state of complete poverty. So tribal, just about. No reading or writing, and of course they acquired those, very quickly. But at some stage, right up until the late, you can call it the 1900, just so be kind of clear about it, that it was a society that was basically an oral society that had a little class on top of it, some Catholic and mostly Protestant, who were illiterate. But all the traditions wound themselves out right up until this time, as they do today in New Guinea and some other remote areas that are somewhat distant from the forces of literacy, which are the forces of science, and it's the forces that say that the worldview of pre-literate people is just nonsense. It's simply another view. I'm sure if you ask a very bright pre-literate person what they thought of our view of the world, he would look at us like we were nuts. We think it's because he's stupid. He's not stupid. He has a consciousness. It's very hard to go back to the early pre-literate consciousness. I want to talk about that in a second, but there's still enough there that he kind of drifts between the unconscious world and the conscious world. His dreams are very easily accessed by him, and he's able to sense things, both in terms of knowing what to do and of seeing the future, that he gets through that ease of being very close to his unconscious. We find it very difficult to go back to it. Oh, God help us, when I ask people sometimes to do soul speak, which requires that you, excuse me, let me just fix this a little bit, that you relax and to let your unconscious rise up and take you and hold you and direct you and let a poem come through you. It's like, oh God, it's just like, please, I'm scared. Pre-literate man's not scared. He just waits for that opportunity, and in fact, he induces it, and in fact, whatever he wants to do. So that I'm very close, so that I would say that my art is very close to pre-literate art in everything I do. Even though I'm using a lot of technical stuff to do it, such as movie makers, I have a room full of computers and keep going. They're just like carving knives to me. I always try to find the software that's the easiest to use or whatever. I want to do it almost intuitively, everything that I do. And as an artist, in fact, I've got down to the point now that I'm making music, which I thought I would never do. I had dreams about it for years and years of being in a band, and my time would come to play, and I didn't know what to do. And I would wake up, and I had to dream enough to see that it was trying to tell me that I should be making music. So about that time, somebody told me about the Apple Garage Band, and I got on and I said, Jesus, this is just like making a poem, except there are tones rather than words. You let it come up, and you lay a layer down in the second line, let it just come, and it just comes. And I'm not going to win any Pulitzer Prizes for music, but I like the music. I play it on my radio station. It holds itself up. There's something about it. Like everything I do, it comes from the unconscious, and I don't have any plans, no ideas, nothing. Just let it come up and let it be. And I would say I would do that when I write prose. I do it when I make poems in any form. I do the same thing when I do photography and I do visual art, which I do. And you can see some in the back, those little faces underneath my name, Justin Spring. I call those soul prints. I just do them intuitively. I don't plan. It just happens, and I do it. And I did a series of those soul prints back 10 years ago. I got friends involved. It's done by sticking your face on a Xerox copier and just manipulating the controls, just going crazy for a night. Just give the guy $50 and tell him to go away, and you just hog down on the machines. And it has a way of revealing personalities. And people, when their faces on the Xerox, forget that they're being artists and they just make faces, but the faces they make are who they are. And then the Xerox process does the rest, because it was manipulating the dark and the light and the way, the speed of the wand that goes past, as they do it. It's quite an orchestra to conduct, and I do it myself too, and I'm very happy with the results. They're very striking and unusual. And they're really visual poems. They're not paintings in themselves, they're kind of visual poems. They have a progression in time, which is important. So that's who I am as an artist. And I would say that in the psychic world, I have lots of friends who are in the psychic world. I have very little truck with most of them because I don't know what they're doing. That it seems to me that art is a natural outcome of the psychic world. But most of the people who are involved in what I would call New Age, and there are lots of them around here, except for a kind of select few, aren't involved in the creation of art whatsoever. They're really involved in doing a lot of meditation to avoid emotion. Hey, welcome, That's exactly what's not supposed to happen. They're supposed to quiet you so you can get in touch with your emotions, not just zero them out, but they spend enormous amounts of time in meditation, and they have a kind of cookbook. I don't know who writes these books, but they have all these books where they have all these ideas about what they should be doing and stuff, but there's no ideas coming from them. If you're going to deal with your unconscious and the psychic world, you should get from inside yourself, and then if they happen to match some of the prevailing patterns of thought about how to deal with the psychic world, and how to live a world that is more in touch with your spirit, then you can perhaps read something about it, or you talk to them. But I mean, very few the people who are involved in what I call alternative views of things, or in New Age, whatever, who really see the function of art. If they do art as kind of an escapist art, it's not from the inside. It's just a lot of doodling, whatever it happens to be, and they're afraid to death of anything that pulls from the inside. I would say that many people, I wouldn't put the whole majority on, but there's many people involved in that, or not involved in that communication with the unconscious that Jung talks about. When I read Jung, it made sense to me. What my basic senses were is that it was good to bring up the unconscious and to bring it up in the form of art. If you don't use art to do it, then you're going to have a horror show. That's what you want to use. That's what art is for. It's to make that underside of you, if you want to think of it that way, that side that is not visible but is you, to bring it forth through art, be it poetry or be it music or be it a painting, so that it's beautiful and it's true. And no matter how dark and no matter how light, it always has that quality. And when you bring those two parts of you together through art, is what happens is you become whole. There's no other way to bring them together. Channeling and all of this stuff that goes on, and all these, some is amazing, but it's ideas. No ideas. Do this, do that, this is what you should do. That's fine. In fact, it can be useful. But really, you have to do something. So I'm kind of straddled in the middle. There's a group of artists here in Sarasota who kind of revolve around soul speak, who have somewhat the same thoughts, is that the thing is to do something and to make art, and to not to think about it, just to make it, and to rely on your internal compulsions and guides, whatever you want to think about, the muse. Rely on the muse. Okay, the muse will take you to where you're supposed to go. Take some nerve, because it's an unsure journey, just like life is an unsure journey. If you don't take your chances, you're not going to go anywhere. You're going to go around circles, and that's what most people are doing in the New Age or spiritual world. I find it's not very exciting. Castaneda didn't take his chances. Go around in circles. He took his chances, you know. And I think that's the most thing is to follow your intuitions no matter what little wisp they are, and to always follow your intuitions no matter what form it takes. I'll tell you a little story that in fact most people kind of look out their window when I tell them this, but back about 20 years ago, I had an intuition that I should dye all my clothes gray. I should only dress in gray clothes. Maybe it's 25 years ago. At some stage in my life when I was thicker than I am today, I would have ignored that. Well, that's going to, people are going to laugh at me and they're going to, what's going on, Justin, But something said to me, I got to a stage where I said, I'm going to honor every intuition I have. And I had done that because I had begun to work with women who were highly intuitive, and they took huge jumps in their art. And I'm thinking of the women that I worked with in Soul Speak. And I saw that to kind of keep up with them, I was going to have to do that as well. I think I had the gifts of art and poetry, but what they were making is emotional jumps, They were going around in circles, playing it safe. And so in fact, what I did is I decided not to play it safe. And so I decided to honor every intuition I had. You get very eccentric that way, and people kind of look at you, but who cares? Human beings are eccentric by nature. It's only the cattle who aren't eccentric. They want to look like the other cattle. But left to their own, they're eccentric. You can see that in pre-literate tribes where everybody has their own peculiarities and they're honored, So they have different identities. They have different gods they follow. Totems might be a toad on one, might be a tiger on the other, and they have those. They adopt that inwardly. It's not just a surface dressing. They become who they are, and they're proud to display it. So I dyed all my clothes gray, and I've been through a whole series of clothes changes then. And then about 10 or years later, something came to me, I should dress in white and black. And I reserved the gray for sleeping. They said to me, don't throw them out, just leave them for sleeping, So I bought and made all white clothes, and I dyed the rest of them black, and that's what I do today. And I know that I may have some change in the future, but if I get up in the morning and it says black, I'll wear black. And if you ask me what black means, I'll say black means black. Figure it out, Just absorb it, When there's something and says to me, dress black, something says to me, dress white, I dress white. And for some reason, in these particular broadcasts, in most of them, I think for all of them, there's something that's told me to dress white. So I dress white. But there are times when for certain activities, I'll just dress black, when I go into public or something like that, or even in my everyday life. I never change, basically. When I go out to buy milk and that, I will dress either in white or black. So that's what I mean. You have to take your chances. If you don't take your chances, then you're just going to be the same guy standing in the same place in the same corner, watching life go by. The intuitions are what make you whole, and as you follow them, the small intuitions, then you follow the slightly larger ones, the more dangerous ones. You keep following them until you develop some really beautiful art. So I think that's important that in fact about me, that as an artist, is that's where I'm from. That I'm not highly psychic. I talk about the psychic world. I understand the psychic world. I trust those who have a sense of the psychic world that's deeper than mine, who see things, who see visions, who see ghosts, who see apparitions on a regular basis, who hear voices on a regular basis. Excuse me. Those people are not crazy. They have a thinner membrane than I do between the unconscious and the conscious world. Mine is small. It gets activated mostly through the act of poetry, and as I just wrote to my son recently, when I found myself doing something in a novel that he had written 25 years ago, that when I read it, my body shivered, and I wrote him a little note about it, and I said, true art, when given its head, which is exactly what he had done there, is always prophetic. That rang in my head. It just came to me, So it's prophetic in the sense of your own life, so to speak, or what's going to happen is that the unconscious is able to find a way out to display something, and it's some metaphor that is true for that time, but may become true over time and over time and over time. And this became, because it was so particular, is that it just rang true when I actually did it. That little scene in his novel came back, and I realized that he had let it go, and it had been prophetic. The art had been prophetic. It hadn't been managed and calculated. I don't know how. In fact, Nabokov has some of the magical moments he has with all his little index cards. God, I don't know. Yeah, I guess he had to work that way, but when in fact he really lets his intuition go, he could be quite marvelous, despite all of the index cards and the rest of it. I don't know. So that's who I am as an artist, and everything that I do. And I would say that everything I do is a poem. I mean, a visual poem, a musical poem. It comes unbidden from the unconscious. I let it develop as it wants to develop. It's like a baby trying to get out of the birth canal. I let it come out. Once it come out, head first, feet first, arms first. Once I come out singing or burping or crapping, I don't care. Let it come out the way that it wants to come out. And that's the baby that you have. No use putting little dresses on it and all the rest of that stuff. That's the baby. That's the beautiful baby. Forget about the rest of the nonsense that poet spends all that time on. It's an activity, but Jesus, why bother? Let me say something too about, I was just talking about the conscious and the unconscious. I'm going to give you just my sense of the unconscious mind, if you think, or the unconscious realm. Who knows what it is, whether it's within us or without us. The same as where, in fact, we have no idea where our consciousness is. We like to think it's up here, but the Greeks, who were very smart, thought that it came from here, from the thymus, and early preliterate people thought it came from the stomach area. That's where they sensed where their consciousness was. That thing that is aware of what's happening. It's so. God knows as to where it is. It could be in every fiber of our body. We have a brain which is like, it's always clicking away like this, but the brain is not consciousness. And for sure it's not the unconscious. It plays a part in it. But in fact, I have the sense that in fact our memories are stored everywhere, all over our bodies. How's that? And that both the conscious and in fact the unconscious mind are not just located up here, but everywhere. That happen to be here as well as switching takes place. Where in fact all the connections are made. That's my sense of it. I'm not going to prove it to you. You can say, well, I don't. It's all up here. Everybody thinks so. Well, fine. Go ahead. You think that, but the fact of the matter is that we have in us the memories that come to us in dreams. We wake up, they become part of our living memory, not part of our personal life. We don't know where they come from. Some are so astounding. I think everybody's had these dreams who was half awake, of scenes and people who are so clear, and we don't know who the hell they are, but in fact we kind of recognize them, but not from this life. They become a part of our memories. They become a part of what we call memory, which is really a kind of mystery in itself. That is, we like to think is a little bowl full of little index cards in our head, but it's very porous, and in fact we seem to have memories that come to us from places outside the boundaries of our bodies, and they come to us at night in dreams or in visions, and they're particular, So in terms of the unconscious, that in fact I found it very useful, even though it's a mystery, and I think the main mystery that the conscious world is what we have here. Isn't just his hands and fat face and his nose, and the stuff in the background that's moving and all that stuff. It's in time and space. We can see it, and that the unconscious world is one that also exists. It's coexistent. It's coexistent with us, and it's an idea. The idea of trying to understand it, and don't hold me to this because nobody's ever figured it out, but it's the one way that I make sense of it, as best I can. It's like a scientific theory. It'll hold up in most cases. Is that the unconscious world consists of intelligent feelings. You know, some people call them spirits or whatever, but I just call them intelligent feeling. For example, there is that in your unconscious is the feeling of what it feels like to be a tree. There is a feeling of what love feels like. Plato called those ideal forms, and what Jung calls them as archetypes, but they're there. We don't know how they exist, but in fact they exist, and they seem to be present in all of us. That's how we agree that something is beautiful if we really let ourselves go. It's how we resonate with those archetypes, you know. And we also have our own particular feelings. At the very bottom is the feeling of what it feels like to be us, which is almost invisible to us. We have some idea of what it feels like to be us, but it's very hard to really feel what it feels like to be us. That's the soul. It's the essential you. There's other things on top of it that your parents have taught you, and that you've taught yourself to stand up straight and to always eat and not talk with your mouth full like I do, you know. You've taught yourself things, so you think yourself, well, you're very correct, and that you're well-mannered, and that you're honorable, and things like this. And those are things that people have told you, or that you've thought about yourself, or your parents have told you when you have some idea of yourself. But inside who you are on the most essential level, and this very complex set of feelings, you know, there's nobody as one thing. There's nobody as just courageous, or there's nobody as just steadfast, or nobody just honorable. It's a whole melange of things. It's like that fire I told you about the other day. It's your essential self. That's almost invisible to us. The only way you can really get a good picture of who you are is, I think, and this is my thinking, okay, is to get a video camera somehow positioned so that you take a close-up video of your face while you're having an orgasm. Hopefully when you're mating with someone, so it's not that lonely face, you know. That might be lonely anyway, God knows what it is, but you'd be surprised. What a look, you know. That's the face your partner sees, but you've never seen it. That is you on the most essential basis, and then these kind of other accretions go on. And then there's the feeling of your father. Your father had a feeling of who he was, but you have a feeling of who your father was. And it's flavored by the archetype called father, and your own memories, and probably some input on fathers from your dreams, which God knows where they come from, you know. You have dreams that are set in your life, and you can recognize situations. It's not that hard. But when you see some of these dreams that you're in, you have no idea as to where they came from. What I think happens is somehow, and this is not how the mind works or how consciousness works or how the unconscious works, but just in a conceptual sense, what I think is this world of spirits or feelings, intelligent feelings that are going around, at times want to communicate with you. And I told you to think of it as your animal unconscious, which has been changed and has been modified because you've changed. What was animal consciousness that split off to become a human consciousness, and what was remained became the unconscious. That is constantly communicating with the unconscious, and is constantly feeling these stories that you're telling. It doesn't care about the stories in particular, but don't confuse it with memory. But in terms of it's a world that's feeling these stories that you're telling all of the time. Feeling. There's a feeling it sends to you that makes you create the story. Okay? And then it's feeling that story as it comes in. It's different because it's been bathed in time. It's a different feeling. And that becomes a part of the unconscious as well. You know, so that's why our unconscious today has a more human touch to it. It still doesn't know how to do things in time. That's why our dreams just jump from this. We're this, then we're a monkey, then we're standing upside down, then we have no hands, then we're in Grand Central Station, then we don't know where we are. We've never seen this world before. And we're with three women we've never seen, but we know them. What is going on, you know? So if we think of it as a feeling world that somehow presses against the membrane of consciousness, and between the two of them they project a picture. That picture comes to us in dreams, okay, and it comes to also in art. And that is important to kind of understand, because the unconscious, it doesn't have a physicality to it, so it's going to seize whatever it can. A sound, it sounds like this, it looks like this, and it's going to do whatever it can to project its feeling story into the real story of time and space that you're going to tell on your consciousness. Don't ask me how it works. No one knows how it works. Lots of thinking going on, and lots of theories and things like that. Nor can we tell where dreams come from. Dreams seem to be a communication that takes place when our conscious mind is numbed, so to speak. Our memories take in information from the dreams, even though it's not part of our observed life, you know, it's observed in the dreams, and it becomes a part of it, and especially that, in fact, we're aware of that as we wake during the dreaming process. We can consciously review the memory, but I think it just goes into memory. You know, just when we wake, we're able to take a look at it as we normally would if we looked at a red truck going down. And yeah, that was that red truck that I saw a couple of minutes ago. You know, so if you think of those two as the conscious mind is looking at the world, it's telling stories to others about the world, or to the gods, but in the case of poetry, you know, I speak to gods and to men. It's a different kind of speech, and the unconscious is taking it all in. Not the words, doesn't care about the words, just cares about the feelings made glittery with time. It wants those back, and it begins to grow and develop, and then when it wants to talk, it sends those out, and somehow out of the mechanism we have, which is why I like this little thing I put together with fractals with the help of Dan Podhast, is that it has that kind of organic feeling as to how these things are actually projected. We really don't have any idea how that takes place. My own feeling is that when animals dream, they don't dream in stories as we do. We dream in what they call Verschlungene stories. They don't really hang together, but they're an attempt at story by the unconscious, which doesn't have the ability to tell stories. It lives outside of time and space, it seems, or has no sense of, and it also seems to have an avenue into something larger than the personal self. And we generally see that in the sense of dreams, but excuse me, again, we can also see that when we have an occasional vision. That happens very infrequently in modern life, you know. Let me just say that if you really want to understand the preliterate mind, and so when you look at their art and you read some of the anthropological and all the rest of the things that are really taken of them, trying to explain them, you can really kind of get them with a kind of grain of salt. Is that the preliterate mind, and it's really true right up until the age of literacy, but it's really true in the early stages. We're hunter-gatherers, okay? That there was a very thin membrane between the conscious mind, which was still forming, and the unconscious mind, which you consider the animal unconscious, okay? And so that preliterate man was constantly slipping between the two. He'd go into a kind of dream state, and then he'd come up and go to dream state. He wasn't afraid of his dreams. Dreams were as natural to him as the conscious world. It was maybe slightly unnatural. Maybe that's hard to say. But the conscious world was probably, his conscious world was probably very close to his dream world. hadn't completely broken away into the rock-solid son of a bitch we have today, which just refuses to admit there's anything except its own little box. You know, and the fact that it dreams at night and you can't explain the dreams, it's just neural discharge, it's an accident, forget about it. But da-di-da equals MC squared. You know, that's complete nonsense. Something's happening. And I like to close this particular thing with just a little, my own sense of the unknowable. You know, Joseph Campbell had a very good sense of the unknowable. He said something like this. This is what I took from him anyway, because I had my own sense of it at the time. That's what happens when you're old. You've begun to think and you have a little wisdom. Is that, as Castaneda says, there's the unknown, which we will eventually know. That is the realm of science or thinking or philosophy, whatever. Okay? And we don't know a lot today, but we will know it. It's unknown, but we will know it. And then there is the unknowable, that we will never know, never know. And that is the world of the unconscious, or the now-all, basically as Castaneda describes it. Or you could also call it the soul, or you could call it God. What we call God today, whether it's the God of Jesus or the God of Muhammad or the God of Buddha, whatever it happens to be, those are, I like to call them to be the faces of God. They're pieces of the unknowable that have come into time, and they're very powerful. Don't let anybody kid you. You see guys on TV today. I was watching Bill Maher. He's such an asshole. He's just knocking religion as though he was in the third grade, but he's never come to really grips with the religious experience. He would do well to read somebody like William James' book on religious experience that he wrote in the 1900s. Or the whole sensibility, religious, mystical sensibility, not these southern, send me $5 preachers, all that crap. That's goes on, but the true religious, the true mystical experience is to go beyond the world of appearances, Justin's fat nose and his glasses, and to get to a state where, in that state of ecstasy, as you experience the unknowable. They're called the moments of transfiguration. They happen to certain people more than you'd like to think. But they usually happen in their early 30s. It's a moment in which, when they're observed, their body glows. How could that happen? But there are enough historical evidences, both, you think Jesus and Moses for two, but I'm sure it happened with Buddha, and it seems to have happened with others too, where it's been observed. And what happens is the world of time and space stops, as real as it is, and in it they experience the unknowable, the life force, God. Not the God of Moses that comes in to be known, you can make sense of it, but the unknowable. What is that unknowable? How can you describe it further than that? Well, I can just say that those people who have those transfiguration experiences come back to lead other people. Reading what Buddha said, when they come back, they usually go into seclusion for 2 or 3 weeks. You can study the pattern of this. There was a wonderful book that was written by a doctor in the 1900s where he tried to suggest that this is happening more and more. And he went back through historical cases that are clearly cases of transfiguration, where the world of time and space stopped, as real as it is, and another world took its place. And at that moment, there was an advance in consciousness and in fact, what Buddha said he came back with, he kind of went into seclusion, and then he decided to go out and to speak to the world, and he spoke to them about what he thought they should do to gain this enlightenment. And people followed him. Completely out of nowhere, They followed him, but the whole civilization followed him. The same with Jesus, the same with Moses, So these faces of God, or in terms of that experience of the unknowable, is something that's powerful, and that they come back, and in fact, in terms of the best they can do, is they try to relate what they've experienced, and that generally is they will put it into words of time and space. And so the God of Moses, you have the God of Jesus, and you have the God of Muhammad, as you go around, the God of Buddha, whatever they happen to be. Principles that should be followed to stay in union with that God which laid down these principles for living, that little face of God. But what they experience is not a face of God, but what they experience is that moment of transfiguration, which transforms them in some way, and others follow. That's the mystery. If they were just crazy, they would come back, talk to people, and people would walk away. But they don't walk away. They sense something is happening beyond their reason, beyond everything, beyond the fact that it's not a fashionable thought. What Buddha was thinking was totally unfashionable. But the time had come. There's something larger at stake. And I think that the easiest way that I like to think of it is there's a dreaming that's occurring. You know, that's something that, in fact, the Aborigines talk about. That there's a dreaming. It's not dream time that happened once like we think, and then there's all these little gods inside it that inhabit it. You know, that, in fact, the dreaming is unknowable. What is the cause of the dreaming that, in fact, is unknown, and who was doing the dreaming is unknown. Within that dreaming, there are the gods that we can communicate with on a human level. Those are the faces of the unknowable that have made themselves available. But in fact, the dreaming itself is the dreaming, and we're inside that dream. You know, Shakespeare has a thing in one of his plays. We are such stuff as dreams are made on. You can interpret that if you want. Well, that's Elizabethan English. Maybe it's just, we are such stuff as dreams are made of, meaning we're kind of unsubstantial and we come and go and change, and you can take it that way. But you can also take it as that we are such stuff as the unknowable plays itself out on. We are both a screen upon which the unknowable projects itself, so that we not only get a chance to watch it, we get a chance to be in it, and that's the rub. Because we're inside the thing that we're watching. We don't know what's going on. The old deist thought about the time clicker, God keeping time like that. In dreams, there's always order. We've had people who have been discovering order since the very earliest human experience, watching the stars go, and then astrology is a very accurate predictor of things, by the way. You know, people go, oh, it doesn't make any sense, but if you follow it carefully, it's a pretty accurate methodology. And today we have what we call science, you know, and there's probably been some things in between. People in the medieval time thought there was an exact one-to-one counterpart between the physical world and the metaphysical world, that they were conjoined. If something happened in the physical world, it happened in the metaphysical world, it happened in the heavens, whatever you want to think about that. So wars here, wars there, peace here, peace there, you know, whatever it happened to be. So there are ways of trying to make sense of what's happening. They always make sense of it, and then when they reach a certain level, it kind of falls apart. We've seen that ourselves in our world of science with Newton. Newton was smart enough to know that he was just what he had done was just one grain of sand on the shore of an infinite beach. You know, he was a mystic. But for all the rest of the world, we got it knocked now. We know what's happening. And that all fell apart when we were able to look a little bit deeper into matter, and it didn't hold up anymore. You know? We were able to look further out. And then and he was a dreamer too. He was very mystical, you know. He said God doesn't throw dice. He's really, there's something driving the order in the world, and that is unknowable. That's the dreaming I like to call as an artist. It's very close to, in fact, the things that take place in an artistic conception, a poem's conception. It just comes, and it orders itself. And in fact, the only concern of God, the unknowable, I like to think, is that the dream be beautiful and it be true. If there's wars and famines and the rest, it doesn't make any difference. It's outside of right or wrong. We bring the right or wrong to it, you know. It's creation. It's beautiful and it's true. And here it is, and there's no consciousness of the dreaming. God is an unconscious dreamer. That's what the Aborigines are trying to tell us, and they go right back to the beginning of when men were smart enough or they were built, didn't have that thick block of consciousness, so they could drift back and they could observe what is happening, and they were smart enough to say, hey, this is a dreaming. And the only one we have that very sophisticated thought is in the Aborigines, who were like a 40,000-year-old time capsule. They were in Australia, and of course we're doing our best to misunderstand what they're telling us, you know. But there is a dreaming that's going on. You know, Mark Van Doren, a poet, a professor out of Columbia, kind of sensed it as an undersong. Beneath all of the songs and all of the plays and everything, and all of the activity of life is an undersong that's moving it forward and around and into itself. God knows where it's going. Nobody knows where it's going. It's all a lot of crap that, in fact, we know what's going to happen in the world. We don't have the slightest idea. Tomorrow, if somebody makes a mistake, we can just blow ourselves to bits, and then we'll just all die of radioactivity. It doesn't take much to do that, you know? Just go completely bananas. We'll have 3 ears and 3 eyes. We'll be crawling around like spiders. That's if we're unlucky. If we're lucky, we'll just go away. You know, we give the world a chance to get back to it. But nobody knows what's going to go on. Nobody can look into the future, really. You get a sense that there's going to be danger there. It's going to be a change, as you know, in terms of most of the prophecies. Well, there's a change taking place in consciousness now. And as Alice Hickey said to me, you're just one of the guys who's just telling us about it. You're just one of many. Not important who they are. You're going to add your song to their songs, and eventually you're like just a milepost on that change that is taking place, you know. And that's the same thing happened in terms of the time of Jesus. All of the astrologers knew something was going to happen. It was in that great galactic cycle of the zodiac, and they had no idea of Jesus. None. They knew something was happening. And I think we can say that something is happening now, because most of the prophecies, which are always wrong on time, but they seem to be right in this period of time, roughly, that in fact we're going through a change in consciousness. How that's going to occur and over what time span, it happens over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and then it becomes apparent that we're much different. For example, the 300 or 400 years after the time of Jesus, which is about the time when we knew there was going to be a change in consciousness, people were different. The eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth have been given up for love like neighbor. The fact that the religions that were built around those principles of consciousness were completely fucked up, and they went around killing each other, that's another story. But in terms of the change of consciousness, for those who were able to see it for what it was, had taken place, and in fact eventually led to the world we have today. And in some sense, you go back another 2,000 years in the terms of when the act of writing was developed, there was a signal that in fact our consciousness would change from that early consciousness, which was artistic and imitative, to one that was rational and explaining and deductive. A change in consciousness. Our actual consciousness was going to change. We'd have a mind space that we could construct activities in and see the future like little playlets, and then choose our action. Forget the gods. We'd have to listen to them really hard. And in fact, the gods didn't occur anymore. The gods went away, basically. Because consciousness and the unconscious are on their own journey. They're like dual stars, moving and influencing each other and going forward. And God knows as to where we're going, but in fact my own sense is that if we do have a pattern, and there seems to be some kind of uniformity and order to everything that we do, until we get to look too close and then it disappears. Oh God, what happened? But Einstein was right. It doesn't seem to be right. There's something the matter here. And we'll get more order, and everybody will be happy for a while. They'll be clapping, and stuff like that, and then they'll just lose it again, and it'll just go away. And hopefully we're going to get some new sense of the world that does not rely completely on reason to explain what is true or to accept what is the truth, So anyway, I'm going to leave you with that's my sense of the dreaming, I think that that's something that you should start to think about. You can go back to the Big Bang, but nobody knows what happened in the millionth of a second between when there was something and when there was nothing. Because the mind simply collapses. It can't think of nothing. Nothing is not empty space. Nothing is nothing. And nobody knows how to think about that. It's unthinkable. It's unknowable. In fact, we can theorize an order. So did the very early men, and so did the astrologers in Babylonia, and so did the medieval alchemists. They all had a sense of theory, and so did our modern physicists have a sense of time and everything, and a sense of how the world is ordered. But it's going to change, because the deeper we look in the world, the more mysterious it becomes. So that's something I think, if you don't have a sense of how mysterious the world and how mysterious we are as the witnesses to this dreaming, it's a trip. We get to be in it and we get to tell stories about it, but the big story is what's occurring right in front of us, and we're inside it. That's something to think about. I'm going to leave you a little thing on that. Let me see what you have here. I had a little, it's called memory. I'm going to try and happen, Memory is, people say, well, what is that all about? This thing called memory is that what we think of when we produce a work of art, or we have a vision, or we have a story to tell others, outside of the story that I went to the baker and he overcharged me for bread. That story we've all heard. And there's millions of variations of gossip, but when we have a story that comes to us, that lifts us to some other place and reveals what it's really like to be human, you have no idea where that story comes from. I don't have any idea. I've had things come to me that are so out of my ordinary experience, and yet are so beautiful and so true if I give them their head. True art, if given its head, is always prophetic. And when I walked into this house, and this was a house of a friend, Victoria Sullivan's professor, who thinks the psychic world is a bunch of nonsense, but it didn't make any difference, because when I walked into her house, and I looked at it, this poem started to come out of my pores. And I took pictures everywhere on the inside of it around Columbia, and I came back and I produced this poem. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I knew that it held something, because her house was jammed. It was like the inside of a memory, but it wasn't really the memory. It was just the surface manifestation of it, but it was enough to get it going. Here's the poem. See you next week. You could ask me what memory is, and I could give you 100 answers. Or I could tell you nothing. What is there to say anyway? Could I say it's like a large, old city with its twisted parks? I could tell you that. That's what memory is like. Or I could tell you it's a house somewhere, or an apartment in an old building. You know the stairs and you think you know the door. I could tell you all of that. But it would be a lie. Memory is nothing except it calls us in. It chooses the door, and we have to follow. And then, somehow, it forms itself out of nothing. Just some hunger pushing it forward. And suddenly, there's only light in the story that you're handing to someone who's looking at you, and they're laughing or crying, or maybe even they're confused, just to see how you came up with something from nothing. It was just something you remembered, you said, and I wanted to tell you about it. Every time I do that, the story changes. It's not like these books where the story stays the same. Memory isn't like that. It isn't like an old apartment in an old house in an old city around these old twisted parks. It's just like light, like what's in front of you right now, but a little dimmer, and it keeps going back and back and back and back and back. They're just dimmer versions of the present. You can barely see them, the little patches of this or that, that feeling that your Aunt Margaret gave you, or the dark shadow on your mother's face. Everything changes.
Memory is just back there. Distant, distant, distant. Distant stars in a dark sky. What is solid anymore but these little scenes, smells, touches of something, and then something like hunger or desire starts to go back and back. And suddenly everything takes blossom from the dark, dark star in the distant heavens. Like this story again. I keep trying to tell you that it comes from nothing. Just stars in a vast heaven that somehow somebody put there. And you can't do anything about it, ever. And don't you ever forget that either. Don't you ever forget that either. You could ask me what memory is, and I could give you 100 answers. Or I could tell you nothing. What is there to say anyway? Could I say it's like a large, old city with its twisted parks? I could tell you that. That's what memory is like. Or I could tell you it's a house somewhere or an apartment in an old building